census, there were about 3,000 Union casualties, and I would guess that the vast majority of them came through here either for treatment or for evacuation. And I struggled to figure out which of the dozen good accounts we have to read you. Obviously, you don't want to sit here and listen to me read a monologue of 12 accounts. So I picked only two, which I will read you. This one from a Union artillery officer, John Tidball. He talked about this. He said, those who could not be accommodated in the house were laid outside upon the grassy lawn, where operation tables were improvised, and the busy surgeons worked with business-like energy. Amputated limbs lay around in piles. Those who had died under the operations were carried off and laid in rows for burial. I looked upon this scene but once. It was too horrible for a second visit. But while I was looking, I saw a man, a strong, athletic-looking fellow, come out of the house with both arms amputated. They'd been taken off above the elbows, and the stumps were secured to his body by bloody bandages. He came out of the house without assistance and deliberately walking from one ambulance to another, selected the one which best suited his fancy. I did not believe that such fortitude could exist in man. That's a pretty good account. And then from July the 4th, just a few days later, a Confederacy came and visited this great landmark, called it a fine old Virginia residence surrounded by beautiful shade trees. And under these trees had crawled a great number of Yankee wounded, some dead, some dying, others suffering silently and patiently. It was a touching sight. The house and barn were filled also, and in one spot I counted not less than 20 dead Yankees that had died of their wounds and been collected together for burial. And one last one from a Georgian who was here in August of 1862. You say, well, what's he doing here in August? When the Union Army left Malvern Hill on the night of July the 1st and went down to Harrison's Landing, George McClellan spent the next 6 weeks pretending that he was going to restart his campaign against Richmond, begging for reinforcements, plotting, planning, and he did actually make one feeble advance. August 5, 6, 7 of 1862, he sent the 3rd Corps up the river road to probe toward Richmond, and they got as far as Malvern Hill, and there was the Second Battle of Malvern Hill in that first week of August. And in fact, the house and the hilltop were right in the middle of it. The Confederates had a battery in the yard. The house was hit several hundred times by shells and bullets, and that explains what this Georgian was doing here. My final quote, he said, every room, outhouse, barn, stables, and the green grassy carpet had been occupied by the wounded of the enemy. He's referring back to July, even though he was only here in August. He said, on one side of the mansion was the fresh outline of a mammoth pit in which were indiscriminately piled in and covered up hundreds of dead. In draining a small body of water near the house, where it was conjectured some artillery may have been thrown by the Yankees, a vast amount of amputated limbs were discovered instead. And nearly every fruit tree in the garden protected with its shade the grave of some Yankee of rank. And the Fergusons told me for years and years, that the owners of the property, that one reason they've never really done anything up here is because they believe that there are still bodies within this fence. Some of you might have heard that from them before, and that could easily be true. I do know that the Union dead from Malvern Hill were removed in 1866 to the Glendale National Cemetery, but it was a very imperfect undertaking. They've been buried for 4 years, and once they were well marked, they weren't going to be found by the reburial crews in 1866. So it's entirely plausible that mammoth pit that he described is right here and still full of bodies, or it could possibly be that just a few that got missed, or it could be that all of the amputated arms and legs were buried here, and of course those weren't disinterred, and the Fergusons may have seen them. Don't know, probably never will know. Don't really want to dig it up to find out, but it lends another layer of significance and solemnness in a way to the Malvern Hill Flat.
Would it ever serve any purpose to do a grand service?